Welcome on back, everybody. This is episode 28 of the All Aussie Rules Footy Podcast. How are we all going? This is our round 12 review. We're flying through the season and buys are back. We're back to the about 5 weeks of 4 or 5 weeks of buys. So that shall be interesting, fun, whatever, however you see it. Only 7 games of football coming up in round 12. So this episode, as always, we'll start with the latest news. We'll jump into the round 12 previews. So, preview of each and every match this weekend. Then we'll have a look at my tips for the weekend, which that's kind of struggling lately, but we'll see how we go this weekend. And then, that will wrap up the episode. Before we start, as always, don't forget, this comes out on YouTube and Spotify twice a week. Like, comment, subscribe, all of those things. Also, you can check me out on all my socials, which are Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of those. Plenty of extra content over on those channels, on the social medias, that is. Also, don't forget that as we're going through buys, we're doing some mid-season reviews for each team, which are only going up on YouTube, so check them out. This week so far, we've released the Brisbane and North Melbourne mid-season reviews. Coming up on Friday will be the Sydney and GWS ones. Sydney will be released about 8 a.m. on Friday morning, and GWS will be released about 1 p.m. in the afternoon, Australian Eastern Standard Time. And then on Monday we'll have our round 12 review, reviewing all of the matches from the weekend, and then across Tuesday and Wednesday we'll have the next bye, mid-season reviews for the two teams having a bye next weekend. So without any further ado, let's jump straight into the latest news. Mid-season draft is tonight. It hasn't been just yet. It starts in approximately 1 hour from recording time. By the time this is released, the draft will be over. So good luck to everybody that is going for the draft. It'll be interesting to see who people pick up. Richmond obviously have a couple spots open, 3 I believe. Brisbane have 4. Collingwood have a couple. A few other teams have a couple. So potentially quite a few players will be picked up, just based on the fact that there's quite a few teams really struggling with injury at the moment, mainly those 3 that I just mentioned, but there are plenty of other teams also. Bulldogs have a couple at the moment. Yeah, so pretty much everyone but St Kilda is really struggling with injuries at the moment. That's happening tonight, which is Wednesday night. I think it starts at about 7 p.m. And then also, what else is news? Possibly the biggest news of the week, the AFL coming out saying that they're tightening the adjudication on holding the balls. So you're not going to have as much time, so prepare for a frustrating weekend of football. I don't think there's any doubts in the world that this weekend is not going to be overly enjoyable to watch. There's a good chance that there's going to be a lot of holding the ball calls, and will they get the balance right straight away? It's very unlikely, but you never know. Maybe they'll get it right. We can only hope. So that's probably the wrap up of the latest news. That's what I've got going. We'll jump straight into the matches for the round. First up, Thursday night football should be an absolute cracker. We've got Port Adelaide hosting Carlton over at Adelaide Oval, 7:30. I think that's local time. On Thursday night should be an absolute ripper. Both teams obviously have very strong midfields. Forward line, probably battle one is probably better in Carlton's favour, but Port Adelaide's got a probably better defence in my opinion. So it should kind of balance out to be a really good contest. how the Port Adelaide Tools handle the Carlton Tools will be a good battle, and how the two midfields go at it. Obviously, some very good players in both teams' midfields. Obviously, Port Adelaide, they're sitting third on the ladder. They're 4-1 over the last 5 weeks. They're cruising. Carlton, they're sitting 8th on the ladder. They did win last week, but they haven't had the best 5 or 6 week period. I still think maybe they're over-possessing it a little bit. I could be wrong, but they certainly are having a lot of the football. Obviously, they still got the win over Gold Coast last week, even though they did have so much of it. But a couple other weeks, I feel like they over-possess it a little bit. Does that hurt them? I don't know. I'm not pretending to know everything, but it certainly seems like that could be an issue for them at the moment. These two teams previously, they did only play each other once last year. It was at Marvel Stadium. Carlton won that one by 50 points in round 18. Round 22, they only played each other once. That was at the MCG. Carlton won that one by 3 points. Last time they played at the Adelaide Oval was 2021, round 22, and Port Adelaide won that by 95 points. How much we can read into that, I don't know. Teams have changed a little bit. Carlton have certainly got better since then. Port Adelaide also probably, though, have maybe improved since that point. Before that, Port Adelaide had won 3, 4, 5 in a row before that one. So historically, over the last, since like 2016, 2017, Port Adelaide has certainly had the better run of it. Carlton have won the last 2 though, but they were both in Melbourne. So how much we read into them, I don't know. Obviously, Carlton have already played at Adelaide Oval. I think they've played there twice. They've definitely played once. They played Fremantle and won. So they shouldn't have any issues with the ground. It's just obviously the crowd will be a lot more in favour of Port Adelaide this week, which they probably haven't had too much lately. That's Carlton, haven't had too much lately. The opposition having a bigger crowd. Looking at the teams offensively, they're both very similar scoring wise. Carlton have a big issue in stopping their opposition scoring for some reason. Whether it's their defense, whether it's just teams getting over the back, I don't know, but yeah, they certainly are struggling to stop teams scoring. They concede 10 points a game more than Port Adelaide, so that's probably their main area of concern for Carlton. Forward efficiency, both teams are very good. Obviously, Port Adelaide is ranked number 1, Carlton's number 5. Port Adelaide get the ball forward a bloody lot. Like, that's plus 8.73 is a huge amount. Carlton struggle a little bit in that area, which is surprising with how much of the football they do possess. Disposal efficiency, both teams are very good. Clearance differential, both teams can be very good. Carlton are a little bit up and down at times, whereas Port Adelaide are pretty consistent at that. Tackling, Port Adelaide are clearly the better team at this, and I would expect to see that again this week. That's probably where the game will be won and lost, in my opinion. Looking at it, I think Port Adelaide, most things point to Port Adelaide in this one. It's at Adelaide Oval. They're probably in better form. Their midfields are probably very even. Port Adelaide probably bring better pressure though across the field. I think the defense of Port Adelaide can probably hold Carlton as good as any team really could hold the tall defenders. But I mean, Carlton still have a lot of talent on their team. They played very good football last week, so I certainly wouldn't be ruling Carlton out in this one, but I think I favour Port Adelaide looking at what we can see there. Don't know where that's still up. Next game up is Collingwood and the Bulldogs on a Friday night. This one will be at Marvel Stadium. Both teams kind of in okay form. Collingwood obviously haven't lost since round 2. However, they have drawn twice. Bulldogs are 2 and 3 in the last 5, but they have won 2 of those in the last few weeks. Obviously, they lost last week against Sydney, but I think they won the 2 weeks before that. Collingwood 7th on the ladder, Bulldogs 11th. Both teams kind of struggling with injuries at the moment. Collingwood losing players by the day, as it seems, and Bulldogs have had a couple long-term injuries as well that are sneaking up on them. It will be interesting to see what teams run out there on Friday night. Looking at these two teams historically, round 17 last year they met. Collingwood won that one by 12 points. If my memory serves me correctly, Bulldogs were certainly in that game a long way. I mean, they were up in the first quarter, then Collingwood kind of brought it back a bit and just held on. 2022, round 9, they played each other. Bulldogs won that one by 48 points, which was a comfortable win. And it was actually the turning point of Collingwood's season in 2022. From that point onwards, they kind of turned their form around and started to win. 2021 Bulldogs won that one by 16 points, and then you go all the way back to 2020, which was COVID year. Collingwood won. 2019 Collingwood won. So a little bit both teams sharing the honours. 4 of their last 5 matchups have been at Marvel Stadium, which Collingwood have won 3 of those 4. The only loss coming in round 9 2022. So historically, probably very similar. How the teams match up, both teams have very good midfields. Forward lines for both teams, probably more so Collingwood is struggling mainly through injury. Collingwood's backline is still pretty much their best backline. There's a chance they might move Billy Frampton forward and have Charlie Dean in the backline, which lowers their backline ability a little bit, I think, but we'll see how that plays out. Certainly going to be a midfield battle. I think even Collingwood are missing a couple of their normal starting midfielders, but they still have plenty of talent in there. Dacos, Jack Crisp, Josh Dacos, a few others. Obviously Pendlebury out, Mitchell's not playing, De Goey's out, so 3 key mids out as well. Looking at the numbers, both teams, well, Bulldogs offensively and defensively are better than Collingwood, which is crazy when their record's worse, but Bulldogs either win games comfortably or they're competitive in most of their losses. They got smacked by Melbourne in round 1, but other than that, most of their losses last week against Sydney was only 12 points. They only lost to Hawthorn by 10 points, or they're about 7 points maybe. So they tend to lose small and then they win big. Like they beat Richmond by 91 points. They beat Gold Coast by 70 odd points. So that's kind of how their season goes. It's either big wins or it's narrow losses, which isn't a bad sign for them for sure. They certainly are putting together an alright season. They just need to probably win a couple more than they have been so far. Inside 50 differential, Bulldogs dominate this. Collingwood are pretty good at it, but Bulldogs are really good at getting the ball forward more than their opposition. It's the number 1 disposal efficiency team versus the number 17 disposal efficiency team, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Bulldogs obviously do handball it a lot, which tends to kind of help the disposal efficiency, but Collingwood also handball it more than maybe they did last year, but still turn it over. Well, they don't actually turn it over that much. Collingwood win the turnover game, but they just kick or dispose of it to 50-50 contests a lot. So it's a weird stat, the disposal efficiency, in that Collingwood are ranked 17 in that, but win the turnover game pretty much most weeks. So it is what it is. Clearance game, Both teams very decent at it. Obviously, Bulldogs are ranked 3, Collingwood are ranked 6. Collingwood's last 5-6 weeks has been huge in the clearance game. Up since round 7. Round 7 they got smacked by Essendon. Since that, then they've really turned their clearance work around. Tackling, Collingwood dropped from number 1 to number 3 last week when they got beaten in tackles by Fremantle, but they're still clearly ahead of the Bulldogs in that department. And both teams play a very similar handball game. Bulldogs probably get a bit more of the ball than Collingwood, but both tend to handball about that 1.4, or will kick it 1.4 times to every handball. This game I can see going either way. I'm not confident tipping either of them. Bulldogs you can never be too confident with, and Collingwood I think probably are the slightly better team if both teams were at full fitness. Obviously neither team is, so who's more disadvantaged? I would say probably Collingwood, but that's very debatable either way. We jump into Saturday football. We have Hawthorn hosting Adelaide at the MCG. This will be at 1:45 local time. And yeah, we got the 4 and I've gone and put stuff all over the place there. 4 and 7 Hawks versus the 4, 6 and 1 Crows. Last 5 weeks have been very similar for both teams. Obviously Hawthorn have really turned their season around. Kind of kick-started with their win over North Melbourne, but since then they've really put together some good games. They've beat St Kilda, they beat Bulldogs. So their season's going well. Adelaide, they could quite easily be undefeated over the last 5 weeks. They could easily be 5-0 because they drew with Brisbane and they only lost by a kick to Collingwood. So their season's kind of really starting to build. If they can put together a strong 3 weeks heading into their bye, all of a sudden finals is certainly not off the card, and maybe even a strong push towards the latter half of the season, which would be a massive turnaround. They lost their first 3 or so, maybe 4, 3. They certainly lost a lot early, so it'll be interesting to see if they can get over the line this week, how that plays out going forward. These two teams haven't played at the MCG against each other since 2018, so teams are very much different since then, but Hawthorn won that one by 56 points. Last year they played at Utah Stadium and that was won by Adelaide by 3 points. The year before, in 2022, they played at Marvel Stadium. Adelaide won that by 30 points. The year before that was at Marvel again. Adelaide won that one. So it's kind of dominated history by last couple of years at least by Adelaide, but that tends to be because Adelaide have probably been the better team over the last few years. Interesting that they haven't played each other in Adelaide since 2020, and yeah, so the last 4 times have been either in Melbourne or Tasmania. So that's a bit strange, but it is what it is. Yeah. Looking at the two teams matching up, neither really set the world on fire offensively. Adelaide can do at times. They certainly can score very freely, but they can also at times not look so well offensively. Hawthorn obviously has kind of turned around a little bit, but they still don't score massive. They did get 100 last week. Defensively, Adelaide are very good. They're very, very good. Hawthorn not so much. Forward efficiency is very similar for both teams, not outstanding. Inside 50s, Adelaide do very well in that regard, whereas Hawthorn struggle a little bit, but that's kind of expected. They're a young team. Adelaide very good with their disposal. Both teams struggle a bit in the clearances, so we'll see how that plays out. And yeah, tackle differential, Adelaide do pretty solid at that, whereas Hawthorn tend to get absolutely dominated in the tackle count week in, week out. Although it has kind of improved the last few weeks. They certainly have brought a lot more pressure, in my opinion, since the Kangaroos win. They've really turned their season around, and the results are showing that. At the MCG, you've got to give Hawthorn a chance. However, Adelaide did play MCG 2 weeks ago against Collingwood and were very good. So I'm going with Adelaide in this. I think they're the better team out of these two, but Hawthorn have certainly shown the last month especially that they can compete with teams and they can win this sort of matchup. So it should be a good game. 6 weeks ago, if you had told me Hawthorn Adelaide were playing Saturday afternoon, I don't know if I would have been too excited about the game, but now it's looking like a good matchup and something that I'll certainly be tuning into. I mean, I watch every game anyway, but I'm a little bit more excited than I would have been 6 weeks ago. Then Saturday afternoon over in the West, we have West Coast hosting St Kilda. And crazily enough, West Coast go into this as favourites at the moment. I can't see that being overturned in the next couple of weeks because St Kilda are struggling. Both teams are 3 and 8, 15th and 16th on the ladder. Both teams are 1 and 4 over the last 5 weeks. Both teams not showing great signs. I mean, there's a lot more positivity around West Coast, even though they lost by 99 points last week. They're a young team that still is getting better most weeks, especially at home they play very well. Whereas St Kilda, they played finals last year and now they're here just going nowhere and getting worse by the week, it seems. The last 3 times these two teams played have all been at Optus Stadium. The last 2, though, have been won by St Kilda. Last year by 8 points. 2022, they won by 28 points. Go back to 2021, and West Coast beat St Kilda that one by 8 points. So St Kilda shouldn't have too many issues with the fact that it's at Optus Stadium. However, I just don't think they're any good at the moment. You look at their numbers, they're 15th ranked offence, scoring 71 points per game. I mean, West Coast obviously score less than that, but if you look at just the numbers of West Coast at Optus Stadium, they'd definitely be above that. They score pretty well at Optus. St Kilda just tend to play boring games, whereas West Coast tend to score a bit more, have higher scoring games. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out here. Both teams struggle to get the ball forward, so that will be like clearances, neither team dominate. Tackles, both teams get beaten at each week, so they're probably not that dissimilar in actual game style and such, and as such it could be a close game. It's not one that I'd be running to the TV to watch if I was just a casual viewer, but it's an intriguing matchup to see how it plays out, because both teams have a lot of similarities between them. I just see more upside on the West Coast side of things, especially over the last 5 weeks. St Kilda started the season well. They only just lost to Geelong round 1 in Geelong. They beat Collingwood in round 2, and they played a couple other games where it was like, was it Gather round that they played Richmond over? Yeah, it would have been Gather round. They played Richmond. And they gave Richmond a 5-goal head start, and they did come back and win, but certainly not convincing that day. So their season just hasn't really got going since probably round 3 or so. So at the moment I'm going West Coast. Things might change, but I'll need to start seeing something from St Kilda before I confidently ever pick them again. It's just the way it is at the moment. Game number 5 is the Saturday night, I won't say blockbuster, but game again between Geelong and Richmond down at the Cattery. Geelong obviously have lost their last 4 games after winning their first 7. They sit 6th on the ladder. Richmond, they've lost a lot in a row. They're 1-10 for the year, sitting 17th on the ladder. And last week though was a little bit of change in fortune for them. They played a lot better against Essendon than they had the previous couple of weeks. Is that good enough to beat Geelong here? Not really, but it at least was positive signs from them. Looking at Geelong, they need to win this. Their season's getting away from them quickly. But the thing is, they win this, they can win a couple more in a row, and all of a sudden they're back in the top four, and everyone will forget the fact that they've lost their last 4 games. Looking at the history, the last 4 times they've played each other has been at the MCG. I'm not sure. I'm assuming they probably have played at the Cattery before, but certainly not in the last 10 years. I probably should have looked to see if they have before that, but they haven't recently. So the last year Richmond actually beat Geelong, which is surprising, but Geelong weren't great last year. 2022 Geelong won the premiership and only just beat Richmond by 3 points. 2021, that was the year that Richmond was still up and about at that point, but Geelong won that one. Won both matchups actually in 2021. 2022, obviously they played each other in the grand final up at the Gabba, and Richmond won that one by 29 points, but up until late in the third it was a pretty even game. Geelong were actually winning at half time, if my memory doesn't falter me. Looking at stats, you look down the line of Richmond and pretty much every stat category is not great reading for them. They're the worst offensive team, they're the second worst defensive team. Accuracy's worst in the league, their forward efficiency's second worst in the league, inside 50 differentials second worst. They have a lot of injuries, so it is kind of understandable, but it's just hard to suggest that they're going to be a chance to win this game. Geelong, their season has fallen apart a little bit, but it's hard to see them not turning that around this weekend. This should be perfect for what they need. Interesting to note that I believe both these two teams are the 2 lowest ranked in free kick differential this year. Richmond are like minus 66, I think, and Geelong minus 44, or somewhere around there. The numbers might be slightly different, but it'll be interesting to see who the umpires give free kicks to. They might not want to give them to either team, but they might also want to give them to the opposition of both teams. They might just end up giving themselves free kicks, who knows, but we'll see what happens in that regard come Saturday night. Looking at that, Geelong minus 4 free kicks per game and Richmond minus 6 free kicks per game. So we'll see who the umpires give their free kicks to. We head on to the first game on Sunday, which is Melbourne hosting Fremantle up in Alice Springs. Melbourne, their season's kind of going alright. They obviously had their loss to West Coast 2 weeks ago, which was quite poor in regards to where they expect to be, but they turned it around. They beat St Kilda comfortably last week. Fremantle, their season started strong, had a little bit of a drop, built back up. There are 6 wins, 4 losses and a draw, which was last week against Collingwood when they came from the clouds to sneak 2 points away. Looking at historically these two teams, I believe last year they played at the MCG and Fremantle somehow won that, which is maybe one of the bigger upsets of the year, being that Melbourne finished top 4, Fremantle didn't make the 8, but in round 11 Fremantle went to Melbourne and won by 7 points. The year before Melbourne won the game at Optus Stadium though, so reversed that, and once again Melbourne won at the MCG that same year. So it's weird that the away team tends to win this matchup quite a lot. Obviously, this one's in Alice Springs, so while it is a Melbourne home game, both teams travel, both teams have to acclimatise. Both teams also don't play a huge amount of games there, so it'll be an interesting matchup and see how that one plays out. Very similar offensively, both teams very good defensively, so scoring wise, you're looking at probably mid 70s to high 80s at most for both teams. They're both pretty good forward efficiently. They're both very similar numbers in inside 50 differential. They don't worry too much about getting the ball forward more than their opposition. They just try to make use of it when they do go forward. Clearances, Fremantle are the number one clearance team in the league, so that's probably where they need to focus. Well, where they will be looking to win the game. And that's probably a focus that Melbourne need to put into this game to make sure that they don't get smacked in the clearances too much. Obviously, Melbourne have arguably the best ruckman in the league. They have some very good midfielders in there, but they still tend to lose the clearances. But trying to break even in that is probably a very important part of their game this weekend. Who do we think's going to win this? I think Melbourne are probably the slightly better team on their best form. They've been a little bit inconsistent this year though. Like they lost to Brisbane in Melbourne, which at the start of the year I would have said, yeah, that's not that bad. But Brisbane haven't shown their best this year, and they lost to West Coast over in West Coast. But then they do games where they beat Adelaide in Adelaide, they beat Port Adelaide in Adelaide, so they're sitting fourth on the ladder. They win this, they're looking to really boost their way into their second half of the year. So yeah, I'm tipping Melbourne, but not with much confidence. Gold Coast versus the Bombers. This one is on the Gold Coast. This Sunday afternoon game, twilight game, should be an interesting one because Gold Coast are undefeated in home games this year. They're 6-0. Unfortunately for them, they're 0-5 in away games. So how that plays out, they need to start winning some of their away games if they're going to play finals. But all they can do is this week is win at home, and this is their biggest challenge, I think, so far for a home game, outside of the Geelong one up in Darwin, but certainly their toughest challenge they've had at the Gold Coast this year, like actually in at this ground. Jeez, I'm struggling to get out what I'm trying to say. Bombers flying. They haven't lost since round 4 when they lost to the Port Adelaide Power on the Friday night of Gather Round. So they are flying along. Both teams offensively very similar, defensively not too far apart. Accuracy not too far apart. Forward efficiency very similar. Inside 50s very similar. Disposal efficiency very similar. Clearances very similar, and tackle count very similar. So across the board, they match up very similar in most ways. Gold Coast tend to kick it a little bit more than Essendon do. Essendon they do kick it at times through the middle, but they do also like to run and handball it a lot. Looking at the history of these two teams, last year they played each other at Marvel Stadium. Essendon won that one by 28 points. 2022 they played at Marvel Stadium. Essendon won that one comfortably by 48 points. 2021, which was COVID year, they played down at the Cattery, and the Bombers won that one by 68 points. So the Bombers have comfortably won the last 3. However, they've all been in Melbourne. 2020, which was COVID year, was the last time they played on the Gold Coast, and that was a draw, 73 apiece. 2019 was also at this ground. Essendon won that one. 2018, Essendon won that one. 2017, Essendon won that one. So historically, Essendon have the wood over Gold Coast quite comfortably, really. How that plays out on the weekend, we'll see. I think if Gold Coast are ever going to win a game against the Bombers on the Gold Coast, this is probably their best chance. Even though Essendon are flying, Gold Coast have that good home record. I am confident that Gold Coast should put in a good fight in this one. There's also a bit of talk around that Essendon might be struggling this week with a bit of flu going through the club, mainly their coaching staff. But whether that affects them going into this round or not, I don't know. I think this is probably the game that the Bombers drop. They've had a good run, but they're going to drop a game eventually. If they win this, then all of a sudden top 4 is well and truly on their agenda for the season. They're sitting second on the ladder at the moment. So yeah, things are going well for the Bombers, and if they do drop this one, it's not the end of the world. A big game for the Gold Coast though. So there's 7 games. We'll just quickly run through those tips again. For Thursday night, we have Port Adelaide hosting Carlton. I have Port Adelaide winning that one. Should be a ripper of a game. I can see both teams. If either team brings their best, they win. Same can kind of be said for Friday night. Collingwood Bulldogs could go either way. I've tipped Bulldogs at the moment. Whether I stay with that, I don't know. I'll wait and see what the teams are. Who's playing for each team. Because there are a lot of injuries, but I think just being at Marvel Stadium probably gives the Bulldogs a slight advantage in this one. Hawthorn, Adelaide in Melbourne. I've gone Adelaide. They were good 2 weeks ago in Melbourne against Collingwood. I think they should be good enough. Hawthorn are playing very good lately though. West Coast hosting St Kilda. I've gone West Coast at the moment. St Kilda need to show more before I can tip them. I know West Coast were pretty average last week, but St Kilda have not shown much good football in the last 6 or 7 weeks. Geelong against Richmond. Geelong should be too strong here. Richmond still battling too many injuries. Melbourne hosting Fremantle up in Alice Springs. I've gone Melbourne at the moment, but once again, this is another game that could easily go either way. Gold Coast Essendon. I've gone Gold Coast. I just think up there on the Gold Coast, I have enough confidence that they can turn around their recent form. They haven't beat the Bombers since 2016, so it's been a long time. They did draw one of those games, but if they're going to break the streak, I think this is as good a chance as they're going to get. So that's my thoughts on it, at least. That wraps up our round 12 preview. Don't forget, as always, to check me out on all my socials. We post different content over on all of them. We have Team of the Weeks, we have Power Rankings, we have all sorts of stuff happening. TikTok, we do match reviews straight after each game. YouTube, Spotify have the podcast twice a week. So don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, hit that bell for notifications. Also, this week and for the next few weeks, we're doing mid-season reviews for each team over on YouTube. So far, we've done Brisbane and North Melbourne have been released. They're live on the channel already. Friday will be Sydney and GWS, and then as the weeks go and teams have buys, we'll be doing each team in that week. That's everything. That's a wrap on episode 28. That's the round 12 preview. Thanks for joining. Don't forget to comment. Let me know who you think's going to win this week. Is your team going to win? Is your team having a bye? If so, let me know how bad my tips were. Thanks for tuning in. Catch us on the next one.